An old, ragged man, hunched under the weight of a heavy sack, slowly stepped into the bank. His clothes were tattered, his face lined with years of hardship, but his voice, steady and firm, cut through the quiet murmur of the room. "This bank is mine." For a second, there was silence. Then laughter. The crowd chuckled, some shaking their heads in amusement. A few whispered to one another, barely trying to contain their grins. Security moved forward, their steps firm, their eyes set on escorting the strange old man out. But then he did something no one expected. He loosened his grip on the sack and let it fall open. And just like that, the laughter stopped. But before we go any further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It means the world to us and helps bring more incredible stories to light. Now back to the tale. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the streets of Rockview, a town where nothing ever seemed to change. A place where life moved at a slow, predictable pace. That is, until that day. The doors of Chase Bank creaked open, and in walked the old man. His cap was pulled low over his weathered face, his worn coat draping over his thin frame. He carried a sack over his shoulder, the fabric aged, stained by time and use. The few customers inside barely spared him a glance. The bank clerks exchanged amused looks. They saw him as nothing more than a poor wanderer, maybe someone hoping for a bit of charity, not someone making a deposit, and certainly not someone making a claim of ownership. But then he reached the center of the room. And he spoke. "I am the owner of this bank." His voice was calm. Not desperate, not pleading, just a simple, undeniable statement of fact. For a second, there was only silence. Then, chuckles. Small at first, then growing. One of the clerks covered her mouth, trying to suppress her laughter. Even the manager, standing tall in his crisp gray suit, shook his head in amusement. But their laughter? It would not last. The sound of amusement rippled through the bank like a wave. A young teller whispered something to her colleague, trying to hold back a grin. Stephen, the broad-shouldered security guard, stepped forward. His badge gleamed under the bank's bright lights. "Sir," he said firmly, crossing his arms, "I think you're confused. Why don't you have a seat while we call someone to help you?" The old man didn't move. He simply shifted the sack off his shoulder and let it drop onto the cold, marble floor with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the room. And just like that, the chuckles died down. The old man's voice was steady, unwavering. "I am not confused," he said. "This bank belongs to me." The manager, Amazon Temp, sighed, stepping forward. He had dealt with upset customers before, but this was something new. "Sir, with all due respect, that's just not possible." His voice was patient, the same voice you'd use for a confused elderly man. "Do you even have an account here?" The old man tilted his head, his face unreadable. "An account," he repeated. "Son, I built this bank." A few nervous laughs fluttered through the air, but they didn't hold the same confidence as before. Stephen, the guard, took another step closer. His hand hovered near his belt. "All right, sir. What's in the sack?" For the first time, the old man smiled. But it wasn't the kind of smile that warmed a room. No, it was slow, careful. A smile filled with memories and something else, too. He bent down. His fingers gripped the rough burlap. And then, he opened the sack. The room changed. Gasps. Wide eyes. Instead of old rags, instead of trash or a handful of coins, bundles of faded banknotes spilled onto the floor. Notes wrapped in paper bands stamped with the very first logo of Chase Bank. A logo that hadn't been seen in over 50 years. A dusty, cracked leather ledger tumbled out next. Pages yellowed with age, yet perfectly preserved. The manager, Temp, blinked. His face paled as he stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the aged banknotes. What is this?" His voice wavered. The old man gave a slow nod, as if he had waited a long time for this moment. "Proof," he said simply. "Proof that I built this bank. That I owned it before your father was even born." Silence. For the first time that day, no one laughed. Temp's hands trembled as he flipped through the ledger, his eyes scanning the names, the dates, The official signatures, signatures that matched the framed certificates hanging behind him. His breath caught in his throat. C.K. Kirby, he whispered. The old man nodded. That's me. A hush fell over the bank. Because that name? That was not a name lost to history. That was the name of the bank's founder. A name that had been erased, thought to be long gone. Temp swallowed hard. That can't be. C.K. Kirby would be over 100 years old. The old man's eyes gleamed. And yet here I stand. A heavy silence settled over the bank. And then the truth began to unfold. He told them everything. How he and his partner, John Williams, built the bank together. How greed had turned friendship into betrayal. How he was forced out, his name erased, his life's work stolen. And now he had returned to take back what was his. Temp's mind raced. The papers looked real. If they were real, then the entire history of Chase Bank was built on a lie. A choice had to be made. Would they bury the truth, let history repeat itself? Or would they finally make things right? One by one, the employees stepped forward, each picking up a faded bill, each placing it gently on the counter. A silent acknowledgement. A quiet stand for the truth. Stephen, the guard, slowly lowered his hand from his belt. He nodded once, silent approval. The old man took a deep breath. For decades, no one had listened. But today, they saw him. Temp exhaled, his grip tightening around the papers. This isn't over, he murmured. The old man nodded. No. But it has begun. And as he turned, walking toward the doors, he did not look back. Because he didn't need to. For the first time in a long, long time, he had won.